Unless you're living under a rock, then you should know that the POCO X7 Pro is a phone made for gamers. Which also means that if you're buying this for the camera, you expect mediocre results. Well, after taking more than 500 photos with this phone, I beg to differ. I was pleasantly surprised with the photo quality I got considering this is a gaming device. While it's not the solution to all your camera needs, POCO has stepped up its camera capabilities with this phone. We actually did a 1-month review which you can check on the channel, but for this video, it's all about the photos. Let's start with the hardware. POCO went with the Sony IMX882, a 50-megapixel sensor with a wide f1.5 aperture and optical image stabilization. This sensor can be found on other gaming-centric phones as well, such as the POCO X6 from last year. Also, it's the same sensor the more affordable POCO X7 is using. Serving as your ultra-wide camera is an 8-megapixel f2.4 sensor from SmartSense, while the selfie camera is a 20-megapixel f2.2 from OmniVision. With that said, let's check out the photos. At this point in the age of phones, you can almost get a bad outdoor shot because of the high resolution and the relatively wide opening of the sensor. So in broad daylight, when the sun is at its brightest, you can expect great photos with great detail quality. But as far as that look goes, ever since POCO came to the scene, their camera quality has been known for high contrast and brownish look. With the POCO X7 Pro, you still get a lot of contrast most of the time, which makes the colors pop even more, and I think part of the reason here is the lack of dynamic range in non-HDR photos, meaning the details in the darkest or the brightest parts of an image are nearly non-existent. This is normal with mid-range phones, especially for gaming-centric devices. With objects or scenes, a contrasty look may work most of the time, but it's not appealing when it comes to skin tones due to the aggressive skin toning. That's something to keep in mind. But once HDR kicks in, you get a slightly better dynamic range. Notice I said slightly? Well, that's because the POCO X7 Pro does better in preserving the highlights than the shadows. In fact, that's the reason why I switched to using Pro mode instead of the typical Auto or Photo mode. I personally don't like the way it makes the shadows appear grayish. One thing about HDR photos is that you don't get to see the actual quality of this video since it is edited and rendered in SDR. However, when you get to view HDR photos of this phone on a large screen like a laptop or a monitor that supports it, the quality just looks way better. In this case, it's something you either take my word for it or not. But if you stick to auto mode by default, POCO X7 Pro loves to overly brighten photos. This is quite a normal behavior with Android devices. However, changing the exposure is now just a tap away thanks to the EV option on the camera app. If that's enough for you, that's fine. But in my case, I would rather have 50 megapixel photos than HDRs. As a result, most of these shots you're looking at were captured at 50 megapixel. The good thing about the fast chipset of the X7 Pro is that it processes 50 megapixel like it's nothing. Additionally, the file size only goes between 8 to 10 megabytes compared to a full-blown 200 megapixel that occupies around 15 to 20 megabytes. However, it's not just about the details. Part of the reason why I switched to Pro mode is to get rid of the wild auto exposure and auto white balance of the camera, which is usually the problem with mid-range phones. It struggles to decide the right exposure and white balance, resulting in overly bright or dark images or bland colors. This is especially noticeable when you zoom into your subject. But in Pro mode, you get to control not only the white balance but also the auto exposure setting. I set this to average metering to allow the camera to expose the whole scene and not just a specific subject. This allows me to get balanced exposure of an entire image. On top of that, there is exposure verification that lets me see the brightest and darkest parts of an image that's blown out, making it easier to expose something that's more important in a photo. Say for example, this black letter case of my phone, which is usually overexposed when left in auto. I had to dial my exposure down to -7 just to get the look that I wanted. The detail quality doesn't easily fall apart indoors, however it does struggle to maintain good color saturation. This can be fixed by manually adjusting the white balance, but that's the thing about mid-range phones. You don't get the best point-and-shoot experience. At some point, you need to override some things to get your desired output. The ultrawide camera is nothing special. I will say this though, at the very least, it's not totally forgettable. There are enough details for photos to look appealing. As far as night mode goes, it's hard to get sharp and clear night shots in extremely low light environments, even with a steady hand. In this case, it's best to use a tripod or something to keep the phone steady. The biggest room for improvement here, I think, is the selfie camera. That 20 megapixel from OmniVision does not work well here. Most of the time, you're going to get bland looking shots. All in all, I think the POCO X7 Pro is a more capable camera now than its predecessors. The quirks or tendencies of a mid-range phone camera are to be expected, of course, but I'm really surprised to see the overall quality you get when you try to understand how the camera works. Sure, this may never be my main camera, given I have more capable phones that I'm using, but I am confident with the photo quality I will get on this phone when my main phones are not available. So that's it for this one. Drop a sub or like if you feel like supporting the channel. And as always, until the next one, stay safe.